Hi, everybody. Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. It is almost Shabbat here in the Land of Israel, pre-recording this a couple of days early. And since she got her preparations done early, which she always does, I managed to get time to sit with an old friend, Dr. Lisa Fredman. I knew her before she was a doctor, PhD in Bible Studies, because she just put out a book. So first of all, Lisa, thanks so much for getting everything ready early so we could sit together.
My pleasure, Eve. Very exciting to be meeting on a professional basis.
That's
and
right.
letting your readers know about this wonderful piece of work that's come out.
Okay, so tell us about the book.
Okay, so Rashi was the most famous Bible commentary in the history of the Jewish people. We don't have any original manuscripts that Rashi wrote. Scholars aren't sure what happened to them. Many believe they were burnt when the Talmud was burnt in Paris in the 1200s. According to some of the annals, there was a wagon load also of manuscripts of Rabbi Solomon, which we Rashi, and that's why we don't have any of his original manuscripts. So what happens when you want to know what the author originally wrote? Generally, you go back to the original manuscripts. So what do you do with Rashi when we don't have any original manuscripts? So the first thing that a scholar will have to do is we'll have to try to find all the possible manuscripts for a certain book, and then compare manuscripts, and based on the comparison of manuscripts, try to get to the original wording of what Rashi wrote. And so basically that's what I did with Rashi's commentary to the book of Mishlei, or in English, Proverbs. I located in libraries throughout the world through microfilm at the National Library in Jerusalem 55 manuscripts of Rashi's commentary. I compared them. After comparing them, I concluded what were my my control group, and then I ultimately came up with my one manuscript, which was my base manuscript, which is a manuscript which is housed in the JTS library in New York. And I just basically combed through and I created a critical edition where I write on the top of the page what I believe is Rashi's original manuscript, his original wording. In the middle of the page, I have the variants from the different manuscripts, and on the bottom, I have an explanation of what Rashi's doing.
Okay, so just to organize, because many of us, especially I would say my Jewish listeners, know who Rashi is. You open any copy of the Bible, and if there's only going to be one commentator, it's going to be Rashi. What was his full name, by the way?
Rabbi Solomon ben Yitzchaki.
Right, so this is Rashi. So we all know Rashi, and there's a certain script that Rashi used also, right? He didn't write in regular Hebrew.
Well, that's a mistake. Rashi actually used regular Hebrew, but when the first Mikraot Gedolot, when the first rabbinic Bible was put together, in order to differentiate between Rashi and the biblical text, they created the Rashi script. It's actually based on Sephardic script. Rashi himself never used Rashi script. That's a very big misconception.
Okay, so we all learn in third or fourth grade, we learn how to read Rashi. Right. And here you are saying that it wasn't even Rashi himself probably would have had to learn how to read it. Right. So that's a fascinating little tidbit. I would like to know how many of my Torah wise listeners knew what Lisa just told us, because that's a great piece of information. So when does he live? Because if you're saying that we think his original works, like in his own hand, obviously, because before the printing press, went up in smoke in Paris. By the way, I think it was in front of the Notre Dame, because I know when the Notre Dame was burning a few months ago, there were people who were saying that somebody had once said long time ago, and I don't know where this goes, that just like these tremendous works of Jewish wisdom had been burnt in front of Notre Dame, maybe one day that was going to come back to haunt them. So that was a little strange, but that's how I remember that there were wagon loads that were burnt right then. So when and where does Rashi live? Okay,
so Rashi lived in northern France. He was born, scholars believe, in 1040, and he died in 1105. He went to study. He went to study in Ashkenaz, which was Germany, in famous yeshiva of Magensa and Worms. And at the age of 30, scholars believe he came back to northern France, to Troyes, and then became the leader of the Jewish community, and started writing a commentary to the Talmud and then a commentary to the Bible. And he did all of this. He was only 65 years old when he died. So between the age of 30 and 65, he wrote all these commentaries that are used until this very day.
Yeah, really a genius. And sometimes I think, as I'm running around Israel, where Rashi never came, some of the other major commentators, the Maimonides and Nachmanides, did at some point in their life get to the land of Israel, and Rashi never did. And sometimes I think to myself, wow, like with all his brilliance, and he wasn't even here, and I wonder what he would have said, if he was here. And I also have to say that I think about him sometimes when I eat a lot of matzah on Passover, because my husband, for some reason, goes by whatever he thinks it was that Rashi said we should do, which was more than I would like to eat. But in any event, he really, I don't think I can overemphasize the impact that he had on the Jewish world and on the Torah world.
Yeah, I just want to point out, in terms of him not coming to Israel, Rashi was a very, very responsible Jewish leader. He goes back to Troy at the age of 30. He goes only back once to Germany to see his teachers and never leaves France again. He was that responsible. He was that busy. Not only was he a Bible commentator and a Talmud commentator, he was the head of the Beit Din. He was the head of all the legal issues in the Jewish communities throughout France. At a certain point, came to him because he became famous even during his lifetime. At the end of his life, he had the horrible Crusades, which decimated the Jewish community in Germany. Many, many questions arose during that time period about Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity. He was very, very busy strengthening the people of his time and being there for them in times of need.
Wasn't he also a vintner? Did I read that somewhere? Did he make wine? Because he made a living. I mean, he also worked.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Many believe he was a vintner. Some scholars have raised questions regarding if that really was his profession, but there is a connection to Rashi and vineyards, yes.
And just as an aside, a few years ago, I interviewed Maggie Anton, who wrote a series of books called Rashi's Daughters. Do you have any knowledge? Because he had girls, he didn't have sons. One of his grandsons, right, Rabbeinu Tam, becomes very famous in his own right, more than one grandson. But there's questions about Rashi. Did his daughters, for example, wear tefillin? Did he raise his daughters doing, I don't know if they would have been the feminists of the time, but doing maybe some things that other people might have only done with their sons? Do you know anything about that?
I mean, we don't know much about his personal life. We've really known very little about his wife. It seems like she must have died at a young age. Keep in mind that he had a yeshiva, he had a Beit Midrash. It's not like today where boys live in a dormitory. The Beit Midrash was in his home. So there's no doubt that his daughters, being raised in Rashi's home, were exposed to a lot of knowledge. I mean, they had yeshiva students living in their home. I'm sure that they overheard their father teaching, and therefore it wouldn't surprise me if they had a vast amount of knowledge. And we can see that from two of their grandsons, Rashi's grandsons, through his daughters, who became great Tosafists and Talmudic scholars.
So how did you get interested in Rashi?
Well, I think it's my love of medieval Jewish history. When I went to go do my doctorate, when I went back to school, I had to decide whether I would go on in the Jewish history track or I would go into Bible. And Rashi really connects both of them because Rashi is a tremendous biblical scholar who lived at a certain period of time, and that time influenced the way he looked at certain things. And that dovetailing of Jewish history and Bible really excited me. And it still excites me when I'm combing through his commentary and I see in his commentary comments that are reaction perhaps to the time that he lives in. When I look through his commentary, I'm comparing manuscripts and I see censorship. I see comments that are whited out in manuscripts because Christian censors demanded that these comments that could have been seen by Christianity as being offensive had to be removed from the manuscript. Not only Jewish manuscripts, we know that I remember reading this, it still stays in my mind, a medieval scholar was scared that the libraries in Europe would become empty because of all of the demands of Christian censorship. So I found that so exciting, the fact that Rashi used his commentary as a way of strengthening the Jewish people. That's what intrigued me, I think, most of all.
So can you give an example of that, of a comment that you think he made that might have been even like some kind of message to the people at the time that would strengthen them, that perhaps in a different time or someone else wouldn't have had that insight that he had?
Yes. I mean, repeatedly in Sefer Mishlei, he tells the Jewish people that they're going through hard times now, but they're going to receive the reward in the future. It's no doubt that this is a reaction to the difficult times the Jews in northern France and Ashkenaz were experiencing. This is even before the Crusades, meaning we don't realize that even when times were good for the Jews in Europe, there were always sporadic outbreaks of violence, anti-Semitic comments. during certain periods in Jewish history in France, the Jews were forced to be in church on Sunday and hear the priest lecture with how to do something about Jesus and so on. The Jews were forced to be there. So Rashi, throughout Sefer Mishlei and throughout his commentary to the Bible, he's strengthening the Jews. He's saying to the Jewish people, why is Esav, why is the Christian world flourishing? And he gives a certain reasons, but then he promises that don't worry, your time is going to come, Jewish people, and you're going to flourish and things are going to be good, and the violence is going to stop. So that's one example. There's so many. It's hard to just pinpoint one of them, but
well, I remember going to a Torah lesson that you were giving years ago when you mentioned Esav or Esau,
right.
Jacob, Isaac's brother, Jacob's brother, excuse me. Right, both of them are Isaac's sons, and you said that in your research you had found you couldn't find anything positive that Rashi had to say about Esav. And Esav is seen as the forerunner of Christianity in kind of a convoluted way that from my research goes through Herod. He's the link because Esav is Edom and Herod comes from an Edomite family that was converted to Judaism. Then he also becomes the Judean vassal king of Rome, and part of Rome then becomes the Byzantine Empire. And that seems to be the link. I don't know if you have any different connection. And you said in this talk that it seems to you that Rashi is being surrounded by Christians who are doing just awful things. So it seemed almost natural that maybe he wouldn't have anything positive to say about someone who he seems as the forerunner of that.
Right. Correct. I mean, it was clear to his reader that when he talks about Esav, he's talking about Christianity, and it was so clear to the reader that Christian censorship would make changes. They knew that the word Esav was equal to Christianity, and very often those comments are changed. The word Amalek was a word also used. Amalek is a descendant of Esau, and also so you see in manuscripts that the word Amalek is changed to a different word. Esav comes from the area of Edom, so Edom becomes Aram in manuscripts. So when you see Christian censorship, the results of Christian censorship, it's something which is unbelievable. Like you see your living history. And when you go through Rashi's commentary, you're actually living history. So you can place yourself in medieval France and understand what the Jewish people are feeling and how Rashi is using his commentary to strengthen them and to give them hope. Despite the difficult times, things are going to get better.
Now, is that a controversial idea, let's say in the Jewish world? Are there other Torah scholars who would say, no, the context of a Torah scholar is free from the context of his life. What he is, with the thoughts he's having, if it's Ruach HaKodesh, if it's some kind of like divine idea to comment on the Bible, has nothing to do with the where he's living and when he's living. He would have gotten that wisdom anywhere. So has that been controversial? Have you had others, Torah scholars, get upset with you for saying that Rashi is actually affected by the context of his world?
It's definitely controversial outside, say, the modern Orthodox community. I think that if you go more to the right, if you go to more a Haredi kind of background or a milieu environment, they will not accept that. I just want to point out that Rashi did not have Ruach HaKodesh. He did not have divine inspiration. We know that Ruach HaKodesh was something which, with once Nevuah prophecy has ended, there's no such thing. We don't have divine inspiration anymore. He was a brilliant man, and he used his brilliance in order to explain the biblical text.
There's a very famous Rashi that starts off the Bible, right, with Breshit. And perhaps maybe that's a classic example of what you were saying now, of the message that he's giving to his people, right? That the Bible starts off with God creating the world, because then if he's giving the Jewish people the land of Israel, that means it's like perpetuity, even though at that time maybe they were thinking, oh my goodness, we're just never going to get home again.
Right. I want to point out not only the first commentary, but some scholars have pointed out that Rashi's opening comment to every book of the 5 books of Moses is an inspirational point to the Jewish people. If you look at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, it begins with, why is God mentioning the names of the descendants of Jacob again? They've already been mentioned coming down to Egypt at the end of Genesis. And the answer Rashi gives is because he loves them. And when you love something, you want to say the names again. There again, why he's emphasizing God's love for the Jewish people. Also in the beginning of the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, the same kind of thing. He emphasizes the special connection of prophecy between the Jewish people and God. So if you look at each of the opening Rashis of the 5 books, he's strengthening the Jewish people, which is a beautiful idea. Starting each book with a booster shot of inspiration. Again, the Jews were the minority among a Christian population, And it's not like the modern world today where you don't want to hear somebody else's idea. You just close your front door. After Rashi, I'll say something very interesting. After Rashi, they developed these handbooks, what you answer the missionary when he comes to your door. Meaning when a Christian would knock at the door and the Jew had to open the door, and then they would quote a verse from, say, Isaiah, what would the Jew answer? He didn't know what to answer. So there are handbooks where they go by every parsha, every book of the Bible. It tells you what the non-Jew will say and what you can answer them.
Yeah, well, I know like in Rome, outside the ghetto in Rome, there's actually a verse from Isaiah saying, like, I don't know the exact verse, that God will punish you, meaning that the Christians are saying to the Jews, listen, don't blame us for the fact that you're now in such dire straits. Your own prophet said this was going to happen to you.
Right. And that was happening all the time. And the regular day-to-day Jew didn't know what to answer. Would you know, Eve, what to answer when they quote you from Isaiah or from Ezekiel?
Right.
So therefore, and going back to the book that I just, the work that I worked on, the book of Mishlei, which is a book of Proverbs, is a book which really isn't very popular among Jews today.
Why is that?
I think first of all, it's not, we know the 5 books of Moses are on their own level. The other books that are popular are ones that tell a story, and also ones that are read on Jewish festivals. Like the book of Ruth is read on the festival of Shavuot, and therefore that's popular. Mishlei is never read in a public forum. So therefore, I think it's been sort of pushed to the side. It's also not a story. It's a book of parables, and it's morals, how a person should lead their life. I want to point out, it was very popular reading in the Middle Ages. There are 55 manuscripts of Rashi's commentary to Proverbs. That equals almost the same number of manuscripts that we found in libraries around the world of Rashi's commentary to, say, the book of Isaiah or Ezekiel. Wow. So in the Middle Ages, I think when people were more interested in Proverbs and in how does one lead a moral life and what kind of lessons can we learn from the world around us in terms of being an upstanding person, it was a much more popular book to learn.
Who wrote it?
King Solomon.
Okay, he was a good writer. He wrote more than one book. Yeah. So, so getting back to the book. So, did you put this out now because you think it has new relevance in today's world where maybe people aren't sure of morality anymore, or because we have a lot of people in the world who are not necessarily people of faith, and now I'm saying in any religion, right? People who are atheists, which you didn't have in the ancient world. Right. We have to keep remembering that. Everybody believed in some kind of higher power. Right. And now you have science, and which shouldn't really negate the religious world. It should just emphasize it, but leaving that aside. But now you have people and books that have been put out that don't even put God in the picture whatsoever. So do you think, and so then people can decide for themselves what is moral and what isn't. So do you think that there's a place for this now in what you've put out, that maybe Proverbs needs to come back again?
I definitely think so. I first of all, I just want to say that how is it possible that we said Rashi is the most famous Bible commentary that ever lived. How is it possible that there's one of his works that's never been, we never searched for the authentic version of what he actually wrote? So that's the first thing. I mean, we're not talking about some anonymous Bible commentator. We're talking about Rashi. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. And the second thing is, yes, the messages that he brings out in his book are impertinent today, just like they were to anyone living in the Middle Ages. How you combine belief with the world that we live in, the challenges that we see around us. How do you raise children? Some of the very famous sentences that like educate each child according to his own way. That's from the book of Mishlei. When we talk about the Torah of the mother and the Torah of the fathers, that also comes from Sefer Mishlei. He talks about where's the place of wisdom in life. So I do believe that, yes, there are a lot of messages here for the modern reader.
So one of the things, fortunately, that we don't have to deal with now, that I'm sure Rashi had to deal with, is if you're going to be forcibly baptized or forced into Christianity, which is what was happening there, and this is, of course, even way before the Inquisition. It was going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, whether it would be better to be killed or to be converted. And I remember going to another Torah lesson of yours years ago, where you specifically took the story of Jephthah's daughter, which is in the book of Judges, a very difficult story, and checked what the Ashkenazi, meaning the more European-based commentators, said versus what we loosely call the Sephardi commentators, the ones that were based here in the Middle East and living under the Muslim world. And he found a tremendous difference between how they interpreted what happened. So I'll let you tell a little bit about Jephthah's daughter. Well, that's the story of, let me see if I know, so you could test me on this since you're the Torah scholar, where he goes to battle and they win, and he has made an oath that the first thing that comes out, he will sacrifice. And who comes out of the front door first is his daughter. And the commentators all go back and forth. Does he really sacrifice her? Does he actually kill her? Or does he kind of just sequester her, maybe put her in what we would say now is some kind of nunnery situation, and she can't have children, which in a way, is a lack of continuity, a type of death. So I found this so fascinating. So maybe elaborate on this a little bit. And if I made any mistakes here, correct me.
Right. No, it's a famous, question, what he did to his daughter. Most traditional commentators believe that it meant that he actually sacrificed his daughter, but those living within a more medieval world, in a medieval setting, viewed it as the idea that perhaps his daughter became a something like a nun, so that she could dedicate her life to God. All right, so that's a very famous division between the commentators. Rashi, it's interesting, Rashi's view of the Christian world was a certain view because he was living within Christianity. Later commentators who were living in the Islamic world, when things became difficult in Islam, would then say, oh, if only we could be living under the Christian world and not under Islam. And that's how ironic Jewish history is. Whereas Jews living during Rashi's time period were saying, if only we could live under the Islamic world because things are so difficult in Christian Europe. So each period had its own challenges. And going back to what I said, the responsible Jewish leaders used their commentaries as a way of strengthening them in whatever challenges they were facing at that time.
So your book now is only in Hebrew. Do you have other work that people could read in English, online or something?
Not yet. I'm now hoping to publish some stuff in English. That's a challenge, not a challenge, but that's one of my goals. My goals. I'm actually now working on what I've done to Rashi, the book of Mishlei. I'm now working on a critical edition of Rashi's commentary, the book of Daniel. That's another book of the Bible that people have, no scholars have gone through Rashi's original manuscripts.
Really?
Yes. So that's...
Because Daniel is a fascinating book. How's your Aramaic?
Not great, but good enough to get through it. It's a very important book, but again, it's not a book that's really widely learned today among Jewish people. There's a lot of mathematics in Sefer Daniel, trying to figure out the end of days, when that end of days is going to come. It's a challenging book to learn, but it's fascinating. And there's also, Rashi uses, again, in his book, in his commentary to Daniel, Rashi uses it as an opportunity to strengthen the Jewish people that, yes, the Messiah will come. It's not like, they were hearing around them that there's no hope for the future. And he's saying, no, there is hope. And Rashi did not like the idea of giving a specific date of when the Messianic time will come. But he felt that perhaps he needs to in order to strengthen his Jewish reader. So... that's my next goal, is to finish that, and along the way perhaps start publishing in English some of my work that I've been doing in Hebrew. So
what's your background? Like, you were born to a rabbinic family? How did you get into this?
So that's a funny story. No, I come from a conservative Jewish family. My father and mother, specifically my father, was a lover of Jewish history. We spoke a lot about Jewish history at our dinner table, and I always loved to learn. And then I went on to get a first degree, BA in Bible, and then I went on to get a master's, and then I ended up going on to get a PhD. I just sort of moved. It wasn't my goal when I started out to get a PhD. I just always loved learning and always wanted to continue. And like I said, once I found that niche of medieval Jewish history and Rashi, I just found that fascinating.
Who else lived in medieval times? Because I know for many, many people, the commentators just kind of a blur, because we learn there's Onkelos and there's Ibn Ezra and there's Rashi and of course Maimonides and Nachmanides, some of them very, very different. And I think it is important to understand the context of their world, and then it makes it like that Maimonides lived in a very Islamic world. I mean, he lived in Egypt and was definitely affected by that. So do you think, how does Rashi compare? I don't know if you could say compare, contrast. How was he different? How was he the same than some of his more or less contemporaries? Okay, so the Rambam is after him, more, and the Ramban also more into the 13th century. But who else was around at that time who wasn't killed by the Crusades? Because there were tremendous yeshivot, like in Worms and Speyer and these places that some rabbinic geniuses on the level of Rashi were killed and their work was lost forever. But how do you compare him? Do you look at that particular time period, the medieval time period, and compare and contrast some of the famous people from then?
Well, what I like to look at is it's interesting. Rashi was living in northern France, which was Christian. If you go down to southern France, which is Provence, Provence was a totally different milieu. Don't forget, Provence was the crossroads between Christian Europe and Islamic Spain. And so why is that significant? Because in Islamic Spain, we have scholars who are exposed to, obviously, to Arabic, and Arabic is a very, very rich language. We have philosophers in the Arab world who impact on many famous Jewish scholars, such as the Rambam and others. They had developed a lot of philological tools, how to actually understand the Bible itself. And the same tools that were being used to understand the Quran, let's say, were then transposed by Jewish scholars to understand Hebrew. So therefore, it was a very, very rich culture for a Jewish scholar living in Spain. So the rabbis that were living in Provence, in southern France, were exposed to the greatness of Rashi in the north, but also were exposed to the greatness of what was happening in Spain. So someone like Rav David Kimchi, his father, Rav Yosef Kimchi, who came after Rashi, are these scholars that start synthesizing, and they start taking Rashi and then also taking what's happening in the Arab world and comparing and contrasting. So it's fascinating how those living in northern France, like Rashi, were somewhat detached from what was happening in Spain. Rashi did use one or two Spanish sources in his commentary, but the philosophy that was coming out of Spain, he was not familiar with because Rashi did not understand Arabic. When he does say something brings a word in Arabic, it's from a source. It's not his own knowledge. And then you move down south, just a little, how many hours distance, and you have these scholars that are privy to both worlds. Wow. So it's really a fascinating comparison between what was in the medieval world, what was happening in different geographical centers.
And as opposed to today, and we really have to understand how things have changed, the Islamic world at the time was science and math and art. It was very vibrant. Medicine, for example, where a lot of medieval Christian Europe was in the Dark Ages and shutting a lot of knowledge down that in any way threatened the church or the church thought threatened it, any kind of science at all. And it was really all those things were coming out of the Arab world. So the Jews who were living more among the Arab world were very much more exposed to that as well.
Right. I mean, it was the golden age of the Islamic world in terms of Jewry. And yes, the Jewish scholars coming out of Spain are Jewish scholars who are linguists, who are philosophers, and therefore they're using all this different knowledge in order to explain the biblical text. And it's very, very rich in terms of their knowledge. They would bemoan the fact that Hebrew was not a spoken language for hundreds of years from the time of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. So the Hebrew language was somewhat limited, whereas the Islamic world was using Arabic, which was such a rich language, which had this continuity of speech. So therefore, what did scholars do? They were looking at Arab words to try to help them understand what the Hebrew word might possibly mean because the Hebrew language was limited. So it's fascinating the interaction between the different languages and the looking at one language in order to try to help fill in what might be missing in Hebrew or knowledge that's missing.
And also Judeo-Arabic, you had mixes of different language, or you had Spanish Hebrew. I mean, you had, based on the different areas, you also had a melding of that, which is just so completely fascinating as well.
Correct. And many of the Jewish scholars that lived in the Arab world, they wrote Hebrew with Arabic letters. So you would not be the Rasag, the famous Saadia Gaon who lived before Rashi, who was a brilliant scholar and philosopher
in Babylon, correct?
His works could not be understood by Rashi because they were in Arabic. So therefore, they had only things that were translated and made it to Rashi could he then be exposed to. So the Arab writers were not embarrassed to be writing in Hebrew with Arabic letters, like they had adopted the script of the world around them. It's just the opposite. They were using Arabic words with Hebrew script. So it's a famous, it's just a very stark difference between medieval Europe, where Rashi lived, Christian Europe, which was more closed. But yet it's a misconception to think that there was not, knowledge was coming in. I wouldn't say it was flowing in. It was coming, but at a much slower rate than those scholars that were living in France and in Spain. And like I said, those living in southern France, how exciting that they have privy to both centers.
Right. Wow. You know, we even though we know intellectually that things were different in the past, it's so important to have a conversation like this because now if you want an article, first of all, you can hit Google Translate, even if the article is in Serbo-Croatian, and you get more or less the gist of the article. Or you want to read something, you can just get it in your computer in a PDF file within 3 minutes. And the flow of information, the documents, if something was burnt, as we said a few minutes ago, it could be gone forever. And we know that there were certain things that were just a few copies and they're gone. And so it's a real blessing now that we have. It's also, I think, a challenge to know what's important to learn and what isn't important to learn, because there's a lot of junk out there as well.
Right. And that's why I felt like, how is it possible that Rashi's works, Rashi, the most famous Bible commentator, have manuscripts were not checked? So that's really how I ended up, starting my work on Rashi. And how is it, like I said, it was I couldn't believe it when I went to my advisor when I was starting my doctorate, and I said to him, I think I have an idea for doctoral thesis, Rashi's commentary of the book of Proverbs, and we both looked at each other and in fascination, how is it possible that no one has ever done this?
Wow. But you said Daniel also. Anything else, or these are the two?
Though,
I'm just wondering what your third book's going to be.
No. That there is a new series being put out by Bar Ilan University called Haketer, where manuscripts are checked, and they've done most of the books of the Bible, but it doesn't have an apparatus of variance like mine does, and doesn't have a commentary on the bottom to help the reader understand, what Rashi's actually doing in his commentary.
Right. So your book is going to be a source book for Torah scholars for wow.
Right.
Just wow, Lisa.
Yeah, very exciting. A girl from New Jersey.
Really?
Girl from New Jersey. Yep.
You see what can happen when faith and the Torah and love of history just all come together, and this was your place. Right. This is their thing to do.
I just want to point out that I spent hours sitting in the National Library in Jerusalem looking in manuscripts in the microfilm room. And now many of those manuscripts are available online. The National Library of Jerusalem has a tremendous project of digitalizing its vast collection of medieval manuscripts. Thousands of medieval manuscripts are now available online. Things that for years scholars would have to go from library to library or sit in a room and look at microfilm, which many are not very clear, are now redigitalized on film. You can do it from your home, in your pajamas, and it's really an amazing undertaking by the National Library.
Wow, good for them. I know for one of the sources that I talk about a lot is the Italian Ganesa, which was this they forgot to empty their little box in Fustat in the Ben Ezra synagogue for hundreds of years, and that's also been a treasure trove of medieval documents.
It has, and I just wanted to, I don't know if you're aware of the Italian Ganesa, which is also fascinating, and that is that in Italy, in some of the famous libraries, it turns out that medieval manuscripts, not only Jewish, were taken apart and used to bind documents.
I call it palimpsest or some word like that. No,
I'm not
where you write again on the same paper and then you rebind it. Yeah.
Okay, so here so what happened? Scholars have found out that in Italian centers, if they would look at the folders in which documents are kept, these are ancient Hebrew documents.
The folders
themselves. So therefore, there are some commentaries that no longer existed. They had been lost to Jewish history, and scholars have found pages of those manuscripts in Italian libraries, and it's called the Italian Ganesa. And it's absolutely fascinating. More and more are coming to light today. As we speak, there are scholars sitting in places throughout Italy and other countries in Europe, taking apart these folders, microfilming them, taking pictures, digitalizing them, and then sitting down and trying to figure out what they were originally.
Wow.
So,
for those of you who don't know, by the way, Ganesa is from an Aramaic word meaning lignoz, to hide. And that's where you would put documents that you no longer needed, maybe needed to be buried, a prayer book that had ripped, you're not just going to throw it away. And so they would be kind of hidden away. But what used to be not garbage, but definitely not something you needed anymore, in the ancient world, for us, becomes a treasure.
Correct. I think the Italian Ganesa, there was a book written called
Sacred Trash.
Sacred Trash, exactly. Yes. Sacred Trash, right.
That's exactly
and we're so lucky. And with the Italian Ganesa, it seems like even if it had God's name in it, it could have been a shopping list. Has God's name in it. They didn't throw it out. And we obviously...
So there's divorce records and marriage records and letters from people to people. One that I read about that I think is hilarious, along the line, a mother writing to her son along the lines of, "You don't write enough." It was just so sweet.
Right. So now we have this whole Italian Ganesa, which is totally different.
Wow.
But that new commentaries are coming to life that we thought were lost forever.
So what we thought was somewhat of a dark period, like after the Talmud is written, is finished, let's say in 500, 600, and the Jews start moving more in towards what we now say is Europe, and then you have the Middle Ages. And we thought for a long time that was kind of a dark period in Jewish history. We didn't know so much was going on. And now you're saying a lot of this is coming to light.
Correct. Very exciting. Amazing. Very exciting.
And you're right there. Yep. You're like a total part of it. I mean, you're one of the movers and shakers. Okay, fantastic. Do you have a website, Lisa, or somewhere where, or if someone wanted the book, if any of my listeners can read Hebrew, and I'm sure that more than a few of you can, where can they get a hold of the book?
The Magnus Press in Hebrew University will have the book.
Okay, what's it called?
What the book? Mm-hmm. It's in Hebrew. It's called Perush Rashi LeMishlei, and in English, it would be a critical edition of Rashi's commentary to the Book of Proverbs. Okay.
Fantastic. Amazing. Great. Just amazing. And looking forward to your next work. Okay. I'll be back. When do you think you'll finish, Daniel?
I think it'll
give you a couple years?
I'd say about 3 years.
Okay. Be back on the couch, maybe not on a Friday right before Shabbat, but we'll do something incredible. You guys have to understand how amazing this woman is. And she's raised 5 children and, done all these things. And it just shows that, like, really when Hashem blesses you with a gift and you put it together and you put your mind to it, then you can do something that no one else has done before.
Right. I mean, I think what really blows my mind is here I am, a girl from New Jersey, moving to Israel and being the one to help bring Rashi to the world. That's something which that's beyond your wildest imagination. So.
Except that it happened. Except that it really happened. And it can happen to any one of you. Figure out what you're supposed to be doing and do it. Not what someone else is doing.
And knowledge is accessible to everybody. It's just the desire. If you have the desire, do it. Go with it.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. You see, this is Jewish feminism. You can be a Torah scholar and be a woman. Like, we don't even think twice about it, really, I think, these days. I'm sure a lot of your students are girls. Yes? Young women?
Yeah. Knowledge is open to everybody. Yeah. And in all areas, whether it be in study of the Bible, in Talmud, women are moving in all directions, and it's very, very exciting.
Right. And out of love, out of wanting to do it, not because anyone's forcing us, because we realize the wisdom in our texts and how we need to bring them out.
I'd say even more than love, out of passion, real passion. Because if you have passion for something, you want to move forward with it and you want to discover as much as you can.
All right. So Eve Harrow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Thank you for listening. And thanks to Ben and to Tabitha. If you're going to be in Israel today, when this is being broadcast, on the 7th, I'm going to be up in the Shomron on a bus trip with One Israel Fund, but I have another one coming up on the 22nd of July and my wine trip on the 15th of August. So you can go to their website and you can see when that's happening. Of course, be in touch with me. Love to hear from all of you and love to come and see you as well. So have a great week, everybody. Eve Harrow from the Judean Hills. Goodbye for now.
This is where Jerusalem was happening 2,000 years ago in all its glory.
Josh Haston here. Check out my show this week as I speak to Zev Ornstein, Director of International Affairs for the City of David Foundation. The City of David just opened what is known as the Pilgrimage Road. Unbelievable.
Some of the most seminal events and figures going back 2,000 years for Jews and Christians alike would have happened along this road. I like to refer to it as the biblical superhighway.
Hear it here exclusively on my show, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.